My parents thought it was hilarious when my older brother inherited a luxury penthouse while I received the deed to an abandoned, trash-filled parking lot. They told me I could use my concrete slab to sleep under the stars. I did not cry. I did not beg. I just pocketed the deed, smiled, and walked away to build an empire that would eventually swallow their entire lives. My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old, and I used to be the biggest disappointment of my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your worth. The air inside the mahogany-paneled conference room of the downtown Seattle law firm was suffocatingly dry. It smelled of expensive leather old paper and the undeniable scent of greed. We were gathered for the reading of the will of my grandfather. I sat at the far end of the massive table, putting physical distance between myself and my family. My father Richard tapped his pen against the polished wood. My mother Beatrice checked her reflection in her phone screen. Across from them sat my older brother Preston and his wife Nia. Preston wore his permanently smug expression. Nia adjusted her designer jewelry, completely unbothered. Ever since I quit my prestigious banking job to start a commercial development firm, my parents had treated me like an embarrassment. To them, social status was everything. Preston, who worked in crypto investments, was their golden child. He played the game. He attended the country club dinners and married a woman who cared about optics just as much. Mr. Davis, the estate lawyer, cleared his throat. He had been reading minor bequeathments for hours before finally reaching the primary real estate assets. The tension spiked. Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Nia pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. To my eldest grandson, Preston, I leave the downtown Seattle penthouse apartment fully paid and unencumbered. The lawyer read, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Nia shrieked. It was not a dignified gasp or a quiet expression of gratitude. It was a loud, piercing scream of pure materialistic victory. She immediately hit record on her phone, panning the camera around the boardroom and then zooming in on Preston. "Oh my gosh, you guys," she announced loudly to her social media followers. "We just got the penthouse. $3.5 million of pure luxury in the sky. God is so good to us." Mr. Davis paused, looking over his glasses with clear disapproval, but my parents beamed with pride. My mother reached across the table to squeeze the hand of Preston. "You deserve it, darling," she cooed. "Your grandfather knew who would maintain the family standard. He knew you needed a proper home to host your investors." Preston puffed out his chest, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "It is a great asset," he said, trying to sound businesslike, but failing to hide his arrogance. "I will make sure the property is put to good use." I sat silently, keeping my face perfectly neutral. I had not expected the penthouse. I knew my grandfather had traditional views and favored the male heir. But I did expect something reasonable, perhaps a small residential property or a modest trust fund to help with my fledgling business. Instead, I was about to receive the ultimate insult. The lawyer shuffled his papers and looked down at the next page. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before continuing. "To my granddaughter Natalie, I leave the deed to the industrial commercial lot located on 4th Avenue South, currently designated as Parcel 87. He slid a thin manila envelope across the long table toward me. I reached out and opened it, pulling out the deed. I recognized the address immediately. It was an old abandoned parking lot in a rundown industrial sector of the city. The lot was notorious for being covered in overgrown weeds, broken glass, and illegal dumping. Its market value was practically nothing compared to the rest of the estate. The silence in the room was broken by a sharp laugh. It was my father. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "A parking lot," he chuckled, shaking his head. "An empty, trash-filled concrete slab." My mother joined in, her laughter light and cruel. "Well," she said, her eyes darting toward me with a mocking gleam, It makes perfect sense. Grandpa knew you loved your independence ever since you threw away your stable banking career to play entrepreneur. Now you have a whole piece of concrete all to yourself. Preston smirked, leaning back to put his arm around Nia. Let me know if you need to borrow a tent, Natalie, he said. I hear the industrial district gets pretty cold at night. My father looked at me with absolute triumph. Grandpa knew what he was doing, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He knew you wanted to build things from the ground up. So he gave you the ground. The dirty, useless ground. You can sleep under the stars out there for all I care. Maybe it will teach you that you should have listened to your family. Instead of crying, I carefully folded the deed and slid it back into the envelope. Thank you for the reminder, Dad. I said, my voice calm. I tightened my grip. I would rather sleep under the stars on my own property than live a fake life under a roof I did not earn. I stood up, pushing my chair back. Enjoy the penthouse, I said. Just make sure you can afford the property taxes. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. They thought they had handed me a worthless joke. They had no idea. I stepped out into the crisp Seattle afternoon. The cool air was a welcome relief. I headed straight for the parking garage, my boots echoing sharply against the concrete. I wanted to get into my car and drive as far away from my family as possible. But of course, they were not going to let me leave without getting the last word. As I rounded the corner to where my reliable but battered 10-year-old sedan was parked, I saw Preston. He was leaning casually against the hood of his brand-new matte black Porsche Panamera. Nia was standing next to him, busy taking a selfie with the luxury car in the background. My parents, Richard and Beatrice, were hovering nearby, looking at Preston like he had just won a Nobel Prize, instead of merely inheriting an apartment he did nothing to earn. Leaving so soon, Natalie Preston called out as I approached. His voice echoed through the dimly lit garage. I stopped a few feet away, gripping my car keys tightly. I have work to do, Preston, I said. Real work, not just waiting around for handouts. He let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and crossed his arms. Come on, Nat, do not be a sore loser. It is just business. Grandpa knew I needed a high-profile asset to host international investors for my crypto fund. You are a small-time developer who renovates old coffee shops. What were you going to do with a luxury penthouse anyway? Before I could unlock my car door, he pushed himself off the Porsche and took a step toward me. Look, I am feeling generous today, he said, reaching into his tailored suit jacket. I know you are probably struggling to pay rent right now. I will buy that piece of junk parking lot off you. $10,000 cash. I can use the space for extra vehicle storage. It is basically a trash dump, but 10 grand should keep your little business afloat for another month or two. I stared at him. The sheer audacity of his offer was staggering. $10,000. I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. You think you can buy me off with pocket change after stealing my entire future once already? Preston rolled his eyes. Oh, please do not bring up ancient history. I stepped closer to him, my anger finally bubbling to the surface. Ancient history, I said, my voice rising. You mean when I was 20 years old and Mom and Dad forced me to empty my entire college savings account to pay for your elite defense lawyers? You drove your sports car into a storefront while completely intoxicated. You could have gone to prison, Preston. But instead, my parents drained the money I earned working double shifts so their golden boy would not have a felony on his record. My mother Beatrice rushed forward, her face flushed with indignation. Do not speak to your brother that way, Natalie, she snapped. We did what we had to do. Preston was about to graduate from a top-tier university. He had a future to protect. He had job offers from Wall Street. We could not let one silly mistake ruin his life. A silly mistake, I echoed, staring at my mother in absolute disbelief. He destroyed a local business, and my college education was just collateral damage to you. You told me I could just take out student loans because my degree in finance was not as important as his reputation. My father stepped up beside my mother, pointing a finger at me. You chose to throw that finance degree away anyway, Richard growled. You quit a perfectly good job at the bank to play construction worker. We sacrificed everything for this family, and you show zero gratitude. Preston is building wealth. You are playing in the dirt. I looked at the four of them standing there in their expensive clothes, united in their delusion. Naya had stopped taking selfies and was glaring at me, adjusting her designer handbag. "Take the 10 grand and go, Natalie," she said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "We have champagne to drink and a penthouse to decorate." I turned my attention back to Preston. "Keep your money, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a dead calm. "You are going to need every single penny when your crypto bubble bursts. And as for you," I looked at my parents. "I am done. I am completely done. You have chosen your son every single time. You stole my college fund to save him, and now you sit back and laugh while he gets a $3.5 million property, and I get an empty lot." I unlocked my car door and yanked it open. "We are not family anymore," I stated clearly, making sure they heard every syllable. "Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not invite me to your holidays. You are dead to me." I got into my car and slammed the door shut. As I started the engine, my father slammed his hand against my window. "You are making a huge mistake, Natalie," he shouted, his voice muffled through the glass. "When your stupid little business goes bankrupt, do not come crawling back to us. We will not give you a dime." I put the car in drive and hit the gas. The tires squealed against the concrete floor of the garage as I sped past them. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw them standing there in a cloud of exhaust. Preston was shaking his head. My mother was clutching her chest in fake outrage, and my father was red-faced with fury. They honestly believed they had won. They honestly believed I was driving away with nothing but a worthless piece of concrete and a bruised ego. They had no idea that this exact piece of land would soon become my greatest business triumph to date. I drove straight from the parking garage to my apartment in the University District. It was a cramped fourth-floor walk-up that smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and radiator dust. I did not care about the size or the peeling paint on the door. It was my command center. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open. Harrison was already sitting at my tiny dining table, typing furiously on his laptop. Harrison was 40 years old and charged $800 an hour. He wore sharp custom suits and possessed a legal mind so ruthless that opposing counsel usually settled before discovery even began. I could not afford his standard rate right now, but Harrison was an investor in potential. He saw exactly what I was capable of when I quit corporate banking. "You got the deed?" he asked, not bothering with a traditional greeting. I tossed the manila envelope onto the scattered blueprints covering the table. "Parcel 87. It is officially mine." Harrison opened the envelope and inspected the single sheet of thick paper. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "And your brother?" "Let me guess. He got the penthouse," I replied, taking off my trench coat and throwing it over a chair. $3.5 million of sky-high arrogance. And Nia made sure to broadcast it to her entire social media following before the lawyer even finished speaking. "They offered me 10 grand for this lot on my way out." Harrison let out a short, dry laugh. "Generous of them. Have they seen the property recently? It has a burnt-out sedan sitting in the middle of it and a chain-link fence that looks like it lost a fight with a commercial bulldozer." I walked over to the kitchen counter and poured 2 cups of black coffee. "That is exactly what they see, Harrison. They see a burnt-out car and broken glass. They see a garbage dump." I handed him a steaming mug. "But we know what it really is." I cleared the leftover takeout boxes from my table and unrolled a massive laminated zoning map of the South Seattle Industrial District. I grabbed a red dry erase marker and drew a heavy circle around parcel 87. Then I drew a massive square right next to it, covering the adjacent 4 blocks. "Talk to me," Harrison said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on the red lines. 2 weeks ago, I had drinks with a former colleague from my banking days. I began tapping the marker against the table. He handles commercial underwriting for massive tech acquisitions. He drank 3 martinis and started complaining about an ironclad non-disclosure agreement he had to sign for a corporate land grab. Harrison narrowed his eyes, taking a calculated sip of coffee. A land grab. Who is the buyer? Shell companies, I said. 5 different LLCs, all registered in Delaware, all buying up the industrial blocks east of 4th Avenue. But the funding originates from a single corporate entity. Amazon. Harrison set his mug down hard. The coffee sloshed over the rim, staining the edge of a blueprint. Amazon. Amazon. I confirmed, my voice sharp and rapid. They are not just building another distribution warehouse, they are planning a massive transit and corporate hub, a secondary headquarters focused entirely on logistics technology. They have been quietly buying up the surrounding properties for 6 months. They are going to petition the city council to rezone the entire district for high-density commercial use. Harrison stared at the map, his mind working at lightning speed. If Amazon builds a hub there, the foot traffic alone will be astronomical. Tech executives, logistics managers, corporate vendors. It will be an absolute gold mine. And Parcel 87 is the exact lot standing between the new Amazon campus and the main highway off-ramp, I said, tapping the red circle again. My grandfather bought it 30 years ago and forgot about it. My family thinks it is a joke, but it is the literal gateway to a multi-billion-dollar development project. We need to move fast, Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. As soon as Amazon makes the official announcement, property values in that district will skyrocket overnight. The city will freeze new commercial permits while they review the zoning overhaul. If we do not have our commercial permits filed and approved before the press release, we will be stuck in bureaucratic purgatory for 3 to 4 years. How much time do we have? I asked. 30 days, Harrison replied, calculating the legal timeline in his head. Maybe 45 if we are incredibly lucky. What is your play, Natalie? You cannot just flip the dirt. You need to develop it to maximize the valuation. I am not flipping it, I said, my voice dead steady. I am building a luxury commercial plaza, high-end upcycled shipping containers, organic coffee roasters, premium EV charging lounges for the tech executives, a rooftop event space overlooking the skyline. I am calling it the Starscape. Harrison raised a skeptical eyebrow. You want to build a high-end commercial hub on a toxic parking lot in 30 days. You need capital, Natalie. Massive capital. Your bank accounts are tapped out from your last 2 renovation projects. That is where my old banking contacts come in, I said, pulling a thick bound binder from my bag and dropping it on the table. I have prepared a comprehensive business plan. We are going to apply for a high-risk commercial construction loan. I know the underwriters personally. I know their specific risk tolerance. I know exactly what financial metrics they need to see to approve a rapid funding schedule. It is a massive financial gamble, Harrison warned, leaning back in his chair. If you leverage everything you own on this loan and the Amazon deal falls through or the permits get denied by the city, you will be bankrupt. Your parents will be right about you. They will not be right, I snapped, slapping my hand against the binder. I am not playing with volatile crypto like my idiot brother. I am playing with prime real estate and solid insider data. I need you to draft the LLC formation, the general contractor agreements, and the commercial permit applications by tomorrow morning. Harrison stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with a sharp grin. You are entirely out of your mind, Natalie. I will have the legal drafts ready by 8 a.m. sharp. An hour later, I stood at the edge of Parcel 87. The Seattle sky was turning a bruised purple as the sun set behind the distant industrial cranes. Harrison was right about the visual reality. The lot was an absolute disaster. Thick weeds pushed through deep, jagged cracks in the concrete. The rusted chain-link fence sagged dangerously toward the street. The air smelled strongly of diesel exhaust and damp earth. I walked past a pile of discarded tires and stood right in the center of the lot. The harsh wind whipped my hair across my face, but I did not feel the biting cold. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, letting the sheer ambition fill my lungs completely. I closed my eyes and blocked out the urban decay surrounding me. I visualized the future. I saw the sleek modern modular architecture. I saw the glowing neon signs of premium coffee shops casting light on the pavement. I saw the line of luxury electric vehicles parked at state-of-the-art charging stations. I saw the corporate elite of Seattle holding exclusive networking events on a beautifully illuminated rooftop. My family thought they had handed me a pile of worthless dirt. They thought they had successfully humiliated me. They thought I would surrender and beg for a piece of their shallow empire. I opened my eyes and looked at the sprawling empty blocks adjacent to my land. Soon those massive blocks would house one of the largest corporate expansions in the history of the city, and my trash-filled parking lot was the front door. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number of the top commercial construction contractor in the city. A man known for working incredibly fast and asking very few questions. He answered on the second ring. Victor. I said, my breath highly visible in the dark air. It is Natalie. I need a massive construction crew on 4th Avenue South by Monday morning. We are building a commercial plaza, and we are doing it in absolute record time. The clock was ticking. The race had officially begun. I was going to build my entire empire right here on this concrete slab, and I was going to make sure my toxic family watched every single second of my triumphant rise to the top. The next 4 weeks became a blur of freezing rain, black coffee, and sheer force of will. I lived in a white hard hat and mud-stained work boots operating on 3 hours of sleep a night. The abandoned lot was no longer quiet. It was a symphony of roaring diesel engines shouting foremen and grinding steel. Victor had kept his word. He brought in 2 crews to work rotating shifts around the clock. But moving fast meant hitting every bureaucratic wall the city of Seattle could throw at us. On a miserable Tuesday morning, I stood ankle-deep in freezing mud, arguing with a city zoning inspector named Miller. He was a notoriously stubborn bureaucratic nightmare who seemed determined to halt my foundation, pour over a remarkably minor drainage technicality. "You cannot pour concrete today, Natalie," he said, holding a clipboard over his head to block the heavy rain. "The runoff grading does not match the secondary permit application. You are off by 2 degrees. I am issuing a strict stop work order right now." I wiped the freezing rain from my eyes and stepped closer to him, refusing to back down. "The grading perfectly matches the primary commercial code, Miller." I fired back, my voice cutting through the noise of the idling cement trucks. "The secondary permit is under an expedited review waiver that your own department head signed off on yesterday afternoon. If you halt this pour, I lose $50,000 in rapid setting concrete, and you will be explaining to your boss why you ignored his direct signature. Call him right now." Miller glared at me, his jaw tight. He pulled out his phone, made a brief call, and angrily shoved the clipboard back under his arm. "You have your clearance," he muttered, turning away. "But I will be back tomorrow to check the electrical trenching." I did not even smile. I just waved my hand in the air, signaling Victor to start the trucks. The massive drums began to spin, pouring the heavy gray foundation of my future. I was freezing, exhausted, and my entire body ached, but the momentum was intoxicating. I was building a massive commercial fortress. Halfway across the world, my brother Preston and his wife Nia were busy building an illusion. They had flown first class to Dubai to celebrate their newfound real estate wealth. While I was swallowing stale coffee in a freezing construction trailer, they were sipping vintage champagne on the deck of a chartered luxury yacht in the Persian Gulf. Nia spent her days meticulously curating their image of extreme wealth. She posed in designer swimwear, against the backdrop of the Dubai skyline, making sure her diamond rings caught the afternoon sun perfectly. She documented every expensive meal, every private shopping spree, and every single moment of their lavish vacation for her thousands of followers. To the outside world, Preston and Nia were the ultimate success story, a power couple dripping in old money and new crypto wealth. My phone vibrated in my pocket as I watched the construction crew secure a massive steel shipping container onto the fresh concrete pad. I pulled off my wet glove and checked the screen. It was a text message from Nia. She had sent a heavily edited photo of herself lounging on a white leather yacht sofa holding a crystal flute of champagne. Below the photo was a mocking message. Heard you are playing in the dirt back home. The weather in Dubai is absolutely perfect today. Let us know if you need a loan for a tent when your little project goes bankrupt. I stared at the glowing screen while the freezing rain soaked my hair. I did not feel angry. I did not feel humiliated. I just felt a profound sense of pity for her sheer ignorance. I locked my phone, shoved it back into my pocket, and turned my attention back to the massive steel structures being welded together. They could keep their champagne. I was building a solid legacy. But the reality behind the designer sunglasses and luxury yachts was entirely different. Preston was drowning. He sat inside the air-conditioned cabin of the yacht, staring at a glowing laptop screen with a sickening knot forming in his stomach. The crypto markets were experiencing a violent, unpredictable crash. The highly leveraged hedge fund he managed was bleeding capital at a truly catastrophic rate. Preston was arrogant, but he was not stupid enough to ignore a massive margin call. His investors were panicking, demanding immediate reassurances and liquidity that he simply did not possess. He had gambled heavily on a highly volatile digital asset, assuming his golden touch would protect him from the massive market corrections. He was terribly wrong. His phone rang, flashing an international number. It was his primary financial backer, a ruthless private equity manager based in New York. Preston wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and quickly answered the call. "We need an injection of capital, Preston," the voice on the other end barked without any introduction. $2 million by the end of the week, or we are liquidating your entire portfolio to cover the massive losses. Preston loosened his designer's silk collar, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs. "The market will definitely bounce back," he insisted, trying to project the confidence he completely lacked. "It is a temporary dip. I just need a brief extension." "There are no extensions," the backer replied coldly. $2 million liquid by Friday or you are completely wiped out. Do you have any hard assets to leverage, or do we initiate the sell-off right now?" Preston looked out the window of the yacht. He saw his wife posing for another photograph, entirely oblivious to the fact that their financial world was catching fire. "I have a hard asset," Preston said, his voice trembling slightly. "I own a massive luxury penthouse downtown. I will officially use the deed as collateral starting today. 6 months. That was all it took to turn a discarded punchline into the crown jewel of the South Seattle Industrial District. The morning fog rolled off the sleek matte black and brushed copper exteriors of the starscape. What used to be a wasteland of shattered glass, discarded tires, and overgrown weeds was now an architectural masterpiece of multi-level upcycled shipping containers. Floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass panels reflected the early morning sun. The air no longer smelled of diesel exhaust and damp earth. It smelled of artisanal espresso and fresh cedar decking. At the center of the plaza, a row of ultra-luxury electric vehicle charging lounges sat ready, complete with private workstations and high-speed fiber-optic internet. I stood in the middle of the central courtyard holding a clipboard and a two-way radio, directing the organized chaos of move-in day. A team of movers was carefully transporting zero-gravity massage chairs into the flagship wellness center on the second level. To my left, the regional manager of a premium organic cafe chain was aggressively pointing at a placement map for their imported Italian espresso machines. I stepped in immediately, shutting down his panic with rapid-fire logistics. "The power drops are exactly where your architectural team approved them 3 months ago," I told him, my voice leaving zero room for debate. "Your contractor needs to use the secondary conduits. Get it done by noon, or you miss the media tour entirely." He nodded nervously and scrambled back to his crew. A sleek black town car pulled up to the valet curb. The CEO of a boutique logistics software firm stepped out, adjusting his tailored suit. He had signed a 5-year lease for the entire third-floor office block, paying a premium just to be within walking distance of the newly announced Amazon mega campus. "Natalie," he called out, extending a hand. "The space looks incredible. It is exactly the aesthetic we wanted for our new corporate culture." I shook his hand firmly. "Welcome to your new headquarters, David. Your security access codes are active, and the rooftop event space is reserved for your launch party tonight." He beamed and headed toward the glass elevator. The gamble had paid off perfectly. As soon as Amazon made their official press release 2 months ago, corporate vultures had swarmed the district, looking for prime real estate. I had the only finished luxury commercial space available. I was turning away prospective tenants because we were fully leased at double the market rate. Harrison walked through the main entrance of the plaza, carrying his signature leather briefcase. He did not look like a lawyer today. He looked like a man who had just pulled off the heist of the century. He dodged a team of florists carrying massive potted ferns and made a beeline for me. I handed off my clipboard to my assistant and met him near the central fountain. "Tell me you brought the numbers," I said, crossing my arms over my blazer. He popped the latches on his briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound folder sealed with the stamp of the premier commercial real estate appraisal firm in the state. "I brought the numbers," he said, a rare, full smile breaking across his normally stoic face. "We got the official reappraisal this morning. The city zoning board fully ratified the commercial designation, and with the Amazon hub breaking ground next door, the foot traffic projections are off the charts." He handed me the folder. I opened it to the final summary page. My eyes locked onto the bolded figure at the bottom. $12 million. The concrete slab my parents laughed at the dirt my brother told me to sleep in was now an officially appraised $12 million commercial fortress, generating massive passive income. I let out a long, slow breath. The risk, the sleep deprivation, the fight with city inspectors, it was all validated in black ink. "We did it, Harrison," I said, closing the folder and looking up at the towering structures around us. He nodded, adjusting his tie. "No, Natalie, you did it. You saw the board, and you played the absolute perfect hand. Now we consolidate and prepare for the expansion." By 9 o'clock that night, the grand opening was a resounding success. The rooftop event space was glowing with ambient light and packed with tech executives and local politicians. I retreated to my private glass-walled office overlooking the plaza to finally catch my breath. I collapsed into my desk chair, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The silence in the office was a sharp contrast to the bass thumping from the rooftop party above. I pulled my personal cell phone out of my bag. I had kept it turned off all day to focus entirely on the launch and the media appearances. When the screen powered on, a barrage of notifications flooded the display. Mixed in with congratulations from colleagues and industry friends was a notification that caught me completely off guard. A missed call and a new voicemail from my father, Richard. He had not tried to contact me once in the 6 months since the lawyer office. My parents had maintained absolute radio silence, convinced I would be the one to break first when I inevitably failed. I tapped the voicemail icon and lifted the phone to my ear. The voice that came through the speaker was not the booming, arrogant patriarch who had mocked me in the parking garage. It was breathless, ragged, and laced with poorly concealed panic. "Natalie, pick up the phone," my father demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "It is your father. I need you to call me back immediately. It is about Preston. There is a situation with the Penthouse and the bank. We have a family emergency and we need to discuss your property. Call me the second you get this." I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the glowing screen. The perfect, invincible facade of my toxic family was finally starting to crack. Preston had clearly mismanaged his life into a corner, and the luxury penthouse they had worshipped was suddenly a liability. They were desperate enough to break their silence and reach out to the daughter they had completely discarded. They wanted to use my success to bail out their golden boy once again. They thought I would rush to save them like I always used to do. But those days were over. I set the phone face down on my sleek mahogany desk, leaned back in my chair and smiled to myself in the quiet room. I was not going to call him back. Let them panic, let them sweat. The game was just getting started. Across town, the atmosphere inside the penthouse was a sharp contrast to my quiet victory. Preston sat slumped over his marble dining table, staring blankly at glowing monitors. The digital charts on the screens were bleeding red. The crypto tokens he leveraged were plummeting in value faster than the system could refresh. This was not a temporary dip. It was a catastrophic collapse. The hedge fund he built on arrogance and borrowed capital was being liquidated by his institutional backers. Preston ran a trembling hand through his styled hair. He ignored the warning calls from his brokers. He ignored the strict margin requirements. He believed his own hype, thinking he was the smartest man in the financial sector. Now the private equity firm in New York was calling in his debt. $4 million, due immediately, because he was foolish enough to use the deed to his grandfather's penthouse as collateral. The bleeding was not contained to his business accounts. It was coming for his home. He reached for his glass of scotch, his hand shaking so violently the ice clinked against the crystal. He took a heavy swallow, trying to numb the rising panic in his chest. In the living room, Nia was oblivious to the financial apocalypse unfolding 10 feet away. She was busy adjusting a bright ring light to record an unboxing video for her social media followers. She wore a silk robe and expensive diamonds that Preston bought with funds he did not possess. The doorbell chimed loudly, echoing through the cavernous apartment. Nia sighed dramatically, pausing her recording. "Preston," she yelled over her shoulder, "get the door. It is probably the concierge with my skincare delivery." Preston did not move. He could not tear his eyes away from the red lines tanking his net worth into negative territory. Nia rolled her eyes and marched to the heavy oak front door herself. She pulled it open, ready to snap at the building staff. Instead, she found a tired-looking man in a cheap suit holding a thick manila envelope. "Are you Nia?" the man asked, checking a clipboard. "Yes," she answered, crossing her arms defensively. "Are you the courier? I need you to leave the packages at the service desk next time." The man did not smile. He handed her the heavy envelope. "You have been legally served," he said, turning and walking toward the elevator without another word. Nia frowned, tearing open the envelope. She expected a brand contract or an event invitation. She pulled out the thick stack of legal papers. The bold black letters at the top of the first page caught her eye immediately. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Nia froze. She read the first paragraph, her manicured nails digging into the heavy paper. Her eyes scanned the terrifying legal jargon outlining a $4 million default and the immediate seizure of the penthouse property. The blood drained from her face. "Preston," she screamed. Her voice was not the curated melodic tone she used for her followers. It was a raw, guttural shriek of pure panic. Preston jumped, spilling his scotch across the marble table. Nia stormed into the dining area and slammed the foreclosure notice down directly on top of his keyboards. "What is this, Preston?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "Explain this to me right now. Why is a bank threatening to take my home?" Preston scrambled to wipe the alcohol off his monitors, avoiding her furious gaze. "Nia, it is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice cracking. "The market took a bad turn today. I leveraged the property temporarily to cover a massive margin call. The market will bounce back. I just need time to restructure the debt." "Restructure the debt!" she shrieked, grabbing the papers and waving them in his face. "It says you owe $4 million, Preston. You put our penthouse, the only real asset we own, up as collateral for your fake internet money. Are you out of your mind?" Preston stood up, trying to project authority he did not have. "Lower your voice, Nia. I am a financial expert. I know what I am doing. I took a calculated risk to double our net worth." "A calculated risk," she laughed hysterically, running a hand through her hair. "You are a fraud, Preston. You have always been a fraud. I ignored the red flags because your parents always covered for you. They bought your luxury car. They paid for our lavish wedding. They bailed you out when you crashed your car in college. You never built anything yourself. I did not marry a loser, Preston. I married the golden boy with the penthouse. If you lose this house, I am leaving you. Preston watched his wife storm out of the room, slamming the massive master bedroom door so hard the framed art on the walls rattled. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He was completely broke. He was about to be homeless. He was about to lose his trophy wife. His chest tightened, and he gasped for air, struggling against a panic attack. He grabbed his phone, his fingers slipping against the glass. He bypassed his financial advisors and went straight to the only safety net he had ever known. He dialed his father. His father, Richard, answered immediately. Dad Preston choked out. Dad, I need your help now. The crypto fund collapsed. They are foreclosing on the penthouse. They are taking everything. Richard let out a heavy breath on the other end of the line. Calm down, Preston. We will fix this. We always fix this. How much do you need? $4 million? Preston sobbed. By Friday. There was a long, terrified silence on the other end. I do not have $4 million in liquid cash. Preston. His father admitted, his voice tight with fear. But your sister does. I saw the news today. Natalie just opened a commercial plaza worth $12 million. We need to go see her. We are going to use her property to save yours. The dining room of the Emerald Point Country Club was a sanctuary of old Seattle wealth, carefully designed to keep the reality of the city outside its heavily guarded gates. Crystal chandeliers caught the midday sunlight, reflecting blindingly off polished mahogany tables and perfectly arranged sterling silver cutlery. My mother Beatrice sat at her usual corner table, sipping a painfully dry martini. She wore a tailored ivory suit that cost more than my first car. Across from her, my father Richard swirled a glass of scotch, holding court with their most elite friends Winston and Caroline Davenport. Beatrice was in the middle of her favorite performance. She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light, ensuring her voice carried just enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Preston and Nia are in Dubai right now, she boasted, waving her manicured hand dismissively. He is managing some incredibly complex international crypto funds. The stress is immense, of course, but that is the price of being a financial prodigy. We are simply exhausted from keeping up with their success. Richard chuckled, nodding along with his wife. He is a chip off the old block, Winston. The boy knows how to leverage an asset. We gave him the downtown penthouse to ensure he had a proper base of operations for his high-net-worth clients. You have to invest in your legacy. Caroline Davenport smiled, but there was a sharp, knowing gleam in her eyes. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, glossy magazine. It was the latest issue of the Pacific Northwest Premier Business Journal, a publication read exclusively by the Seattle corporate elite. Well, Beatrice, Caroline said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You must be absolutely exhausted from keeping up with both of your children. I was completely stunned when I opened my subscription this morning. You have been holding out on us. I had no idea your daughter was such a commercial real estate visionary. The smiles on the faces of my parents froze instantly. Richard stopped swirling his scotch. Beatrice blinked, her grip tightening imperceptibly on the stem of her martini glass. Our daughter Beatrice repeated, her voice tightrope walking between confusion and panic. Yes, Natalie, Caroline said, slapping the heavy magazine down onto the center of the mahogany table. She pushed it across the polished wood, directly into the hands of my father. I simply had to bring this straight to you. You must be bursting with pride. Richard stared down at the cover. His breath caught in his throat. Beatrice leaned over his shoulder, her perfectly powdered face draining of all color. It was a double-page spread. On the left side was a high-resolution photograph of me standing in front of the glowing modern architecture of the starscape. I was wearing a sharp, tailored blazer, looking directly into the camera with absolute, unbothered confidence. On the right side, the bold black headline screamed off the glossy paper. The $12 million visionary, how Natalie transformed a discarded industrial lot into the gateway of the new Amazon hub. Richard felt a cold sweat break out across the back of his neck. The article detailed how I had utilized insider zoning knowledge to secure the permits just weeks before the massive Amazon corporate expansion was announced. It explicitly stated the brand new appraised value of the property, $12 million. The worthless concrete slab they had given me as a cruel joke was now worth almost 4 times the value of the penthouse they had gifted to their golden boy. Winston leaned forward, chuckling. A brilliant play, Richard. Did you advise her on the acquisition? Panic flared in the eyes of my father, but his survival instinct as a social climber kicked in immediately. He forced a hearty laugh that sounded like grinding gears. Advise her, he boomed, slapping the table. Winston, I gave her the land myself. Beatrice caught the lifeline instantly. Oh, Caroline, we knew exactly what we were doing, she said, waving her hand. Natalie has always had a rebellious streak. When she left her banking career, we knew we had to test her entrepreneurial spirit. We purposely gave her the most challenging, underdeveloped asset in the family portfolio. A test, Caroline asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Exactly, Richard agreed, leaning into the lie with aggressive confidence. We wanted to build her character. Anyone can manage a pristine high-rise, but it takes true grit to develop raw industrial dirt. We could not be prouder of how she rose to the challenge we set for her. The Davenports nodded, impressed by the narrative of tough love producing billionaire results. They chatted for another 10 minutes before finally excusing themselves. The moment Winston and Caroline were out of earshot, the facade shattered completely. Beatrice dropped her martini glass onto the table with a sharp clatter. Her face contorted with absolute fury. $12 million, she hissed, leaning across the table toward Richard. You told me that lot was a toxic liability. You told me it was worthless dirt. Richard grabbed the magazine, his knuckles turning white. Do not put this on me, Beatrice, he snarled, keeping his voice low. You laughed just as hard as I did when the lawyer handed her the deed. She played us. She sat in that boardroom, took our insult, and knew she was holding a winning lottery ticket. Before he could speak further, his cell phone vibrated violently in his suit pocket. He pulled it out and answered a call from Preston in Dubai. Within 30 seconds, the face of my father turned the color of ash. He listened to his golden boy sob through the receiver, confessing to the catastrophic crypto collapse, the massive margin call, and the imminent foreclosure of the downtown penthouse. Richard promised to fix it and ended the call. He set the phone down next to the magazine. What is it? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. Preston lost everything, Richard said, his voice hollow. The crypto fund collapsed. He leveraged the penthouse. The bank is foreclosing on Friday. Unless we pay them $4 million, Preston will be homeless. Beatrice gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. $4 million? Richard, we do not have that kind of liquidity. What are we going to do? Richard slowly turned his gaze down to the magazine. He stared at my face on the cover. The terror in his eyes slowly morphed into a dark, calculating greed. We do not have the money, Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But our daughter does. She is sitting on a $12 million unencumbered asset. She built that plaza on land I gave her. That makes it family property. Beatrice caught his gaze, her own greed overriding her panic. She is still our daughter, she reasoned, her voice turning cold and sharp. She has always craved our approval. She spent her entire life trying to make us proud. If we go to her now and tell her we finally accept her, she will do whatever we ask. Exactly, Richard said, grabbing the magazine. We are going to her plaza. We are going to tell her how proud we are. And then we are going to use her property to save her brother. I sat behind my custom polished concrete desk, reviewing the finalized lease agreements for the second phase of the Starscape. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my office offered a commanding view of the central plaza below. It was a beautiful, crisp Seattle morning. My sanctuary of productivity was abruptly shattered by the sound of shouting in the reception area. My assistant, a sharp and fiercely protective young man named David, was standing his ground. You cannot go in there, he stated firmly, his voice muffled through the heavy glass door. She is in a closed session. I do not care about her schedule. A familiar, arrogant voice boomed. I am her father. Get out of my way. The glass door swung open with such force it slammed against the rubber doorstop. Richard marched into my office. Beatrice followed closely behind him, and trailing them, looking completely unhinged and severely jet-lagged, were Preston and Nia. They must have booked the first emergency flight out of Dubai the moment the margin call hit. Preston looked physically ill, his designer airport attire wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. Nia had her oversized sunglasses pushed up into her messy hair, clutching her luxury tote bag like a life preserver. David stepped into the office, his face flushed with frustration. "Natalie, I am so sorry," he said. "I told security to head up here." "It is fine, David," I said, my voice perfectly level. I did not stand up. I did not flinch. I simply closed my leather-bound portfolio and folded my hands on the desk. "You can cancel security. Give us 5 minutes." David nodded and closed the door, leaving me enclosed in the soundproof glass box with the 4 people who despised me most in the world. I looked at each of them. They looked like a pack of cornered animals. The sheer desperation radiating off Preston was almost suffocating. He could not even look me in the eye. He just stared at the polished concrete floor. Natalie Beatrice gasped, stepping forward. She immediately deployed her favorite weapon: the tears. Her eyes welled up with practiced precision, her voice trembling with manufactured maternal distress. "Thank God you are here. We have a massive family emergency." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I did not offer them a seat. "I am working, Beatrice," I said, keeping my tone completely corporate. "If this is a medical emergency, there is a hospital 3 blocks away. If it is anything else, you are trespassing." Beatrice pressed a hand to her chest, letting out a dramatic sob. "How can you be so cold? Your brother is in trouble, terrible trouble. The markets crashed and his investment fund was liquidated. The bank is foreclosing on his penthouse. They are going to take his home, Natalie. He is going to be on the street by Friday." I slowly shifted my gaze to Preston. The golden boy. The financial prodigy. "You lost the penthouse?" I asked, my voice dripping with icy amusement. "The $3.5 million unencumbered asset that you were supposed to use to host international investors. You gambled it away on fake internet coins." "It was a market anomaly," Preston stammered, his voice cracking. "A completely unpredictable sequence of algorithmic dumping. I just need a bridge loan to cover the margin call. I can make it back. I know I can make it back." Beatrice rushed forward, placing both of her hands flat on my desk. She leaned in, her fake tears instantly drying up as her true objective surfaced. "This plaza is worth $12 million, Natalie. We saw the article. You own it completely free and clear. We just need you to sign a temporary collateral agreement. You leverage this property to secure a $4 million line of credit for Preston. It is completely safe. Once the market corrects, he will pay off the lien and you will get your clean title back." I stared at her. The absolute breathtaking audacity of her demand hung in the quiet air of my office. They stormed into the business I built with my own blood and sweat and demanded I hand it over to fix the self-inflicted ruin of their favorite child. Richard stepped up beside his wife, puffing out his chest to project the patriarchal authority he had always used to force my compliance. "Do not overthink this, Natalie," he commanded. "Your brother needs $4 million. You have a $12 million asset sitting right here. It is simple math. We are family, and family protects each other. Sign the paperwork today so the bank does not seize his property tomorrow." I let a heavy, agonizing silence fill the room. I let them stand there, shifting uncomfortably under my deadpan stare. I reached out and slowly picked up my silver fountain pen, turning it over in my fingers. "Family protects each other." I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous volume. "That is a fascinating philosophy, Richard. I must have missed that lesson during my mid-20s. "Natalie, do not start this," Beatrice pleaded, waving her hand dismissively. "We do not have time for your past grievances. This is an active crisis." I stood up. I did it slowly, deliberately, pushing my chair back. I walked around the edge of the large desk and stopped 3 feet away from my mother. I stood taller than her, forcing her to look up into my eyes. "Let us talk about an active crisis," I said, my voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "Let us talk about 5 years ago when I quit banking. I had exactly $400 to my name because you drained my savings for his expensive lawyers. I was living in a studio apartment with no heat in the middle of January. I called you Beatrice, begging for a $50 loan just so I could buy groceries for the week. I had severe bronchitis and I could not afford my medication. Do you remember what you told me?" Beatrice swallowed hard, her eyes darting away. "I told you to get a real job. You told me that starvation was the price of stubbornness," I corrected her sharply. "You let me eat plain rice for an entire month. You let me freeze. You let me sit in the dark when my electricity was shut off. And when I finally managed to secure my first small commercial loan to flip a coffee shop, I asked you, Richard, to simply co-sign as a guarantor so I could get a lower interest rate. Not give me money, just co-sign." "What did you say?" Richard tightened his jaw, refusing to answer. "You said you do not back losers," I stated, echoing his exact words from years ago. "You said my business ventures were a humiliating stain on the family legacy, and you would not risk a single point of your credit score to support my delusions." I took a step toward Preston. He shrank back, visibly intimidated. "And you," I said, pointing the silver pen directly at his chest. "You stood in a parking garage 6 months ago, leaning against a car our parents bought you. You laughed in my face. You mocked the very dirt this building is currently sitting on." I turned back to my parents, spreading my arms wide to encompass the entire luxury plaza visible through the glass walls. "I built an empire on the trash you threw at me. I bled for this property. I worked 18-hour days in the freezing rain fighting city inspectors and cutthroat contractors while you drank champagne on yachts in Dubai. And now you have the absolute nerve to storm into my corporate office." I stepped right into the personal space of my mother, my voice echoing off the glass. "You want me to risk a $12 million asset for the brother who told me to sleep in the dirt?" Beatrice flinched, her face turning crimson with rage and embarrassment. "You are being completely unreasonable, Natalie. If Preston loses that penthouse, his entire reputation is destroyed. He will be bankrupted." "Then he better learn how to pitch a tent," I said, my voice laced with absolute finality. "Because you are not getting a single red cent from me. Not now, not ever. I would rather burn this entire plaza to the ground than sign my name on a single document to save him." Nia completely lost her mind. She dropped her designer tote bag onto the concrete floor with a loud thud and shoved past Beatrice. Marching right up to me, she completely invaded my personal space. She raised a manicured hand, pointing a long acrylic nail directly at my face. "You selfish witch!" Nia shrieked. "You think you are so brilliant, do you? You think you can sit up here and watch your own flesh and blood lose everything? You did not earn this." I did not blink or step back. I stared at the trembling finger pointed between my eyes. "Put your hand down, Nia," I said, my voice dangerously low. She stepped even closer. "I will not put it down," she yelled. "You are a fraud, Natalie. Do you honestly think you have a right to keep this to yourself? That land belonged to the grandfather of Preston. He bought it. It has been in this family for decades. That makes this family property." I tilted my head. "Family property?" I asked conversationally. "Please explain your brilliant legal theory to me, Nia. I am fascinated." "Do not play dumb with me," she snapped. "You only have this asset because a man with the bloodline of Preston handed it to you. Preston is legally entitled to 50% of the profits. If you will not leverage the property to save the penthouse, then you need to sign over a 50% equity stake to your brother right now. We will sell his half to cover the margin call. It is his birthright." I let out a harsh laugh. The sheer delusion required to utter those words was impressive. "Birthright," I repeated, turning to my brother. Preston, who was staring at the floor, actually flinched. "Your wife is fighting your battles for you, Preston. Let me educate you, Naya. Since clearly your husband, the supposed financial genius, failed to explain basic property law before storming into my headquarters. I walked behind my desk picking up my silver fountain pen. When the estate lawyer handed me that deed 6 months ago, the property ceased to belong to my grandfather, I explained. I own this parcel in fee, simple, absolute. There is no family trust. There is no shared equity. Family property is a fictional concept used by greedy relatives to steal what they did not earn. Nia slammed her hands on my desk. We will sue you, she screamed. We will take you to court and prove you exploited a family asset. We will tell a judge you hoarded the profits while your brother faced bankruptcy. Go ahead, I challenged. Hire a lawyer. Oh, wait, you cannot afford one because your husband just lost $4 million. But let us pretend you find a lawyer willing to take a frivolous lawsuit on contingency. Do you know what happens during discovery? They look at the capital investment. They look at who secured the construction loans. I leveraged my own personal credit. I secured the multi-million-dollar development loans using my own previous business assets. Preston contributed absolutely zero, capital zero labor, and zero risk. If you walk into a courtroom demanding 50% of an LLC because you share a last name with the owner, the judge will laugh you out of the building. Beatrice pushed past Nia, her face frantic. Natalie, please, she begged. You do not have to give him 50%. Just help us. We will pay you back. We will treat you better. Just do not let him lose the penthouse. He will be ruined. His reputation in the financial sector will be destroyed. I looked at my mother and felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt. The emotional hold she had over me was completely severed. His reputation is already destroyed, Beatrice, I stated coldly. The entire crypto sector knows he was margin called. The private equity firm is already liquidating his assets. I am not setting my $12 million plaza on fire to keep him warm. Richard slammed his right fist hard against the glass. You ungrateful brat, he roared. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us. I owe you exactly what you offered me in that parking garage, I shot back. $10,000. That was the value you placed on my life. You told me to sell my land to Preston so he could use it as a trash dump. You told me I would come crawling back when I went bankrupt. Well, I am not bankrupt, and I am not crawling. I reached across my massive desk and pressed the heavy silver intercom button right now. David, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father. Send the security team up to my office immediately, please. We have trespassers. Natalie, you cannot do this, Beatrice sobbed, reaching to grab my arm. I pulled back instantly. I already have, I replied. The heavy glass door swung open and 3 large security guards stepped into the office. Please escort these individuals out of the building, I instructed. If they refuse, call the police and press formal trespassing charges. The lead guard nodded and stepped toward Richard. Sir, it is time to leave, he said. Richard straightened his jacket. You will regret this, Natalie, he seethed. You have destroyed your family. You are completely alone. Nia was hyperventilating as a guard took her arm. You are a monster, she spat. You are going to burn in hell for leaving us on the street. Preston did not say a word. The golden child was shattered. He looked like a hollow shell. He turned and walked out, dragging his feet across the polished concrete. I watched the security team herd my toxic family into the elevator. I did not feel alone. I felt incredibly powerful. I sat back down in my ergonomic chair, smoothed the lapels of my blazer, and opened my leather-bound portfolio to resume reviewing my lease agreements. The plaza was thriving, and I had an empire to run. I tried to focus on the lease agreements on my desk, but the residual energy in the office was impossible to ignore. The air still felt thick with their entitlement. I glanced at the security monitors mounted on the wall to my left. The feed showed my security team escorting the 4 of them into the main glass elevator. But instead of taking them straight to the underground parking garage, the guards had to stop at the ground floor lobby because Nia was physically refusing to get back into the elevator car. I let out a sharp sigh and closed my portfolio. I could not risk them harassing my high-end corporate tenants or causing a public relations nightmare on my pristine ground floor. I tapped my smartwatch to alert David that I was heading down and stepped out of my office. The ride down in the private executive elevator took exactly 14 seconds. Through the transparent shaft, I could see the expansive main lobby of the Starscape. It was an architectural marvel of repurposed industrial steel, living green walls, and polished concrete. Usually, it was a quiet sanctuary where tech billionaires and startup founders drank artisanal matcha and discussed merger acquisitions. Today, it was a circus. When the elevator doors slid open, the sound of my sister-in-law shrieking echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Nia was standing near the central water feature, violently attempting to yank her arm out of the grip of the lead security guard. She was screaming about police brutality and threatening to destroy the career of the guard on her social media channels. Preston stood a few feet away, looking completely catatonic. He stared blankly at the massive digital stock ticker mounted above the reception desk, watching the crypto markets continue their aggressive downward spiral. Beatrice was pacing back and forth aggressively, whispering into her cell phone, presumably trying to call her wealthy friends to complain about her cruel and ungrateful daughter. I stepped out of the elevator, and the sharp click of my heels against the concrete immediately drew their attention. The lobby was filled with onlookers. Executives holding briefcases paused on their way to meetings. Baristas from the cafe wiped down counters while staring wide-eyed at the unfolding drama. I did not care who was watching. This was my building, and I controlled the narrative here. Take them to the street, I instructed the lead guard, my voice echoing clearly across the lobby. If she continues to resist, arrest her for creating a public disturbance. Richard, who had been arguing with a second guard near the revolving glass doors, suddenly stopped. He turned around to face me, and the expression on his face made my blood run entirely cold. The desperate, pleading father I had seen upstairs was completely gone. The mask of parental concern had shattered and fallen to the floor. What stood before me now was the ruthless, manipulative patriarch who had spent 30 years stepping on anyone who got in the way of his ego. He adjusted the lapels of his expensive custom-tailored suit and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The security guard moved to block him, but I raised a hand signaling the guard to hold his position. I wanted to hear exactly what Richard had to say. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Natalie?" He began, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble that carried perfectly across the quiet lobby. "You think because you poured some concrete and built some glass walls that you have somehow outplayed me. You think you can just banish your family and keep this entire gold mine to yourself." "I already have, Richard," I replied, maintaining absolute direct eye contact. "The deed is in my name. The business is registered to my holding company. You have zero leverage and zero power here. You are just an angry man standing in my lobby facing bankruptcy by proxy." A dark, vicious smile twisted the corners of his mouth. It was a smile completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "You seem to have forgotten a very critical legal detail in your rush to play the independent billionaire," he said, taking another slow step forward. "Your grandfather left you this land, yes. But who do you think executed that will? Who do you think holds the power of attorney over the entire estate?" "I am the sole executor of the estate of your grandfather, Natalie. I manage the trusts. I manage the lingering assets. And I have the absolute legal authority to contest any transfer of property if I suspect foul play." I crossed my arms over my chest. My posture relaxed despite the sudden shift in his tactics. "Foul play," I echoed. "What exactly are you going to invent, Richard? You handed me the deed yourself in front of a room full of witnesses while laughing at me. I am going to find the most vicious, aggressive corporate litigation lawyer in the city of Seattle," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "I am going to file a massive lawsuit claiming you exercised undue influence over a medicated elderly man. I will claim you manipulated your grandfather into giving you the only piece of industrial land that you secretly knew Amazon was going to buy. I will tell the judge that you committed elder abuse and corporate fraud to steal the most valuable asset in the family portfolio. The lobby was dead silent now. Even Nia had stopped screaming to listen to the brutal legal threat being laid out. I will tie this property up in so much aggressive litigation that you will not be able to breathe. Richard continued, his voice rising with vindictive energy. I will file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. I will ask a judge to place a hard freeze on all of your corporate bank accounts pending a full investigation. I will put a legal lien on this entire plaza. You will not be able to sign a single new lease. You will not be able to collect rent. You will not be able to pay your fancy construction loans. He stepped right up to the invisible boundary the security guard had formed. I will bleed you completely dry in legal fees, Natalie. I will drag this out for years until your lenders panic and call in your loans. I will force you into bankruptcy, and then I will take this company from you. I will strip it down, sell it to the highest bidder, and I will use the money to save my son. You are going to lose everything. He stood there, chest heaving, staring at me with absolute hatred. He fully expected me to crack. He expected the independent businesswoman to crumble under the weight of a multi-million-dollar legal threat from a man who had crushed corporate rivals for decades. He expected fear. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had stolen my college fund, who had mocked my dreams, and who was now threatening to destroy my entire life just to protect the son who had gambled away a fortune. I let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds. Then I smiled. It was a genuine, brilliant smile. Try, I said, my voice soft, but laced with pure titanium. Richard blinked, thrown completely off balance by my reaction. Find your lawyer, Richard. I continued, stepping closer to him until we were separated by mere inches. File your frivolous lawsuit. File your emergency injunctions. Bring every single piece of legal ammunition you can afford to purchase. Because the second you file that paperwork, you are stepping into an arena where you do not make the rules anymore. You are stepping into my world. And I promise you, I will not just defeat you in court. I will absolutely obliterate you. I turned to the lead security guard. Throw them out, I ordered. If they set 1 foot on this property again, have them arrested. I spun on my heel and walked back toward the private glass elevator, without looking back once. I heard the scuffle behind me as security physically pushed them through the revolving doors and out onto the rainy Seattle pavement. The threat was real. Richard was ruthless enough to try and freeze my assets, but he was severely underestimating the team I had behind me. He thought he was playing chess. He did not realize I had already flipped the entire board. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harrison. We were going to war. While I was preparing for a corporate bloodbath, my father and brother were sitting in a dimly lit office on the 42nd floor of a downtown skyscraper. The office belonged to Donovan, a corporate litigation attorney known for his completely ruthless and highly unethical legal maneuvers. He was the kind of lawyer who did not care about the actual truth. He only cared about finding the structural financial weakness in an opponent and exploiting it until they bled dry. Richard paced the length of the expensive Persian rug while Preston sat rigidly in a heavy leather chair, biting his fingernails. They were rapidly running out of time. The crypto margin call was hanging over the head of Preston like a heavy steel guillotine. He had less than 48 hours before the bank seized his luxury penthouse. They needed a massive injection of capital to stall the foreclosure, and they needed a war chest to launch a full-scale legal assault on my company. Donovan sat behind his massive desk reviewing the estate documents of my late grandfather. He steepled his fingers and looked at my father with cold, calculating eyes. The legal strategy here is straightforward, Donovan said, his voice smooth and measured. We cannot simply challenge the physical deed. The transfer of the property was completely legal. However, we can challenge the specific psychological circumstances under which the property transfer occurred. We file an emergency ex parte injunction citing undue influence and elder abuse. Preston leaned forward, his eyes wide with desperate, frantic hope. What does that actually mean in a courtroom? It means we construct a compelling narrative, Donovan explained, sliding a thick stack of drafted legal documents across the polished desk. We present medical evidence to a judge that your grandfather was heavily medicated during his final months of life. We claim that Natalie somehow acquired illegal insider knowledge regarding the Amazon commercial expansion before the will was drafted. We forcefully argue that she deliberately manipulated a vulnerable elderly man into handing over the single most valuable piece of commercial real estate in the entire family portfolio, while intentionally leaving you the supposedly superior residential asset to completely mask her true deceptive intentions. Richard stopped pacing and slammed his right fist onto the heavy desk. Exactly, he barked loudly. That is exactly what she did to us. She played us all for absolute fools. She stole $12 million from the legacy of this family. By filing this immediate injunction, Donovan continued, ignoring the emotional outburst. We request an immediate temporary freeze on all of her corporate assets and holding companies. We argue that she is actively attempting to liquidate or hide the stolen equity. If the judge grants the financial freeze, she will not be able to access her business bank accounts. She will not be able to sign any new commercial leases. She will not be able to execute any major vendor partnerships. It will completely paralyze the daily operations of her commercial plaza. Preston wiped a thick bead of sweat from his upper lip. How fast can you officially file it? I can have it on the desk of a superior court judge by tomorrow morning, Donovan said sharply. But an aggressive litigation strategy of this massive magnitude requires substantial capital up front. I require a legal retainer of $500,000 immediately to initiate the complex filings. Furthermore, you need to satisfy the massive margin call on the downtown Penthouse, or this entire endeavor is completely pointless. Richard swallowed hard. His own liquidity was securely tied up in conservative long-term trusts that he could not quickly access without triggering massive, catastrophic tax penalties. I do not have the liquid cash right now, he admitted, his voice tight with profound humiliation. Donovan smiled a thin, highly predatory smile. I completely anticipated that financial hurdle. That is exactly why I took the liberty of inviting a senior representative from Capital Apex to join us in the office today. The heavy mahogany door opened, and a man in a sharp charcoal suit walked into the room, carrying a sleek metal briefcase. Capital Apex was a private equity firm infamous in Seattle for highly predatory lending practices. They specialized in high-interest, distressed asset loans. They ruthlessly preyed on desperate corporate executives who had exhausted all their traditional banking options. The representative placed his briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing a thick stack of dense financial contracts. My firm is willing to completely consolidate your crypto margin debt and provide a $2 million legal war chest for this lawsuit, he said, his tone entirely devoid of human emotion. We will immediately wire $4 million to satisfy the margin call on the Penthouse, keeping the property entirely out of bank foreclosure. We will then release the remaining $2 million directly to Donovan to bleed your sister dry in civil court. Preston let out a massive, ragged sigh of relief, sinking back into his chair. Thank you, he breathed heavily. Thank God for this. However, the representative continued, his voice dropping to a harsh mechanical cadence. The terms reflect the extreme financial risk of this capital injection. The commercial loan carries an annual interest rate of 32% compounding monthly. The sole collateral for this $6 million note will be the downtown Penthouse. If you miss a single payment by even 1 minute, the contract contains an aggressive accelerated default clause. Capital Apex will immediately seize the Penthouse and legally bypass the standard lengthy foreclosure process. Richard stared at the contract in absolute pure horror. 32%, he gasped aloud. That is financial suicide. You are signing away your entire life, Preston. Preston snatched the heavy brass pen from the desk. I do not have a choice, Dad. He snapped, his blinding arrogance returning the absolute second he saw a lifeline. If I do not sign this document, I am sleeping on the street by Friday. Naya will divorce me and take everything else. My entire reputation in the financial sector is completely dead. With this money, Donovan completely freezes the bank accounts of Natalie. We fiercely squeeze her until she finally breaks. We force her to settle out of court. We take 50% of her $12 million plaza, and we pay off this predatory loan in 6 months. It is a completely calculated financial risk. Preston aggressively scribbled his signature across the bottom of the predatory loan agreement, sealing his own fate with arrogant strokes of blue ink. He did not bother to read the fine print detailing the ruthless default penalties. He handed the heavy document back to the representative. "Get the money wired right now," he ordered, trying to sound like a powerful titan of industry instead of a desperate man begging for his life. Donovan gathered the injunction paperwork and placed it into a neat leather folder. "Excellent," he said, standing up. "I will formally file the emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning." While they were shaking hands and prematurely celebrating their dirty legal trap, I was completely unaware of the massive financial bomb heading straight for my growing empire. I was sitting in my own sleek office preparing for the absolute biggest professional milestone of my entire life. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, I was scheduled to sign an exclusive 10-year partnership agreement with a global tech logistics firm. The massive deal required an immediate transfer of capital from my accounts to secure the commercial infrastructure upgrades they requested. If my accounts were legally frozen by a judge before my signature hit that paper, the entire deal would instantly collapse. I would be in immediate default on my own major construction loans, and the city would revoke my commercial operating permits. The malicious trap was fully set, and the digital timer was relentlessly ticking down to absolute zero, with absolutely no warning of the massive impending legal danger ahead. The first strike did not come from a courtroom. It came from a smartphone. At 6 a.m., before the courthouse doors even opened, Nia sat on her luxury sofa. She scrubbed off her makeup to look exhausted. She dressed in a plain, oversized gray sweater, hiding her designer jewelry. She positioned her camera ring light to cast deep shadows under her eyes, and then she pressed record and unleashed a digital atomic bomb. "Hey guys," Nia began, her voice trembling with manufactured vulnerability. "I usually only share the positive parts of my life on here, but today I need to ask for help. My family is being destroyed and I do not know what else to do." She paused, letting a single calculated tear roll down her cheek. "My husband Preston comes from a wealthy real estate family, but his younger sister Natalie recently committed an act of unbelievable cruelty. When their grandfather passed away, he left behind a massive commercial plot. It was family property meant to secure our children. But Natalie used insider connections and manipulation to steal the entire $12 million estate out from under us." Nia looked directly into the lens, her voice cracking with fake anguish. "My husband is currently facing financial ruin. We are losing our home. And while my sister-in-law sits in her shiny new luxury plaza called the Starscape, she is actively trying to make a black woman and her family homeless. We begged her for a temporary loan just to save our house. She laughed in my face and had her security team physically throw me onto the street. She stole my inheritance, and now she is trying to destroy my life. Please share this. People need to know who they are really doing business with at the Starscape." She ended the video and posted it to her lifestyle account, which boasted over 300,000 followers. Then she paid to boost the post across all major social media platforms. She tagged local Seattle news outlets, social justice organizations, and every corporate tenant currently leasing space at my plaza. By 7:30 a.m., the video had gone completely viral. I woke up to my phone vibrating off my nightstand. The screen was a blur of notifications, hundreds of missed calls and alerts. I opened a text from my assistant David. It contained a link and a terrifying message. "You need to get to the office right now. We are under attack." I clicked the link and watched the video of Nia. My blood boiled. It was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. She deliberately twisted the narrative, completely omitting the fact that her husband lost $4 million in a reckless crypto gamble. She conveniently left out the detail that the property was legally willed solely to me. She framed my refusal to hand over my hard-earned empire as an act of racial and financial violence. The internet mob consumed the lie instantly, and without question. I opened the comment section. It was a terrifying digital bloodbath. Thousands of angry strangers were calling for my immediate ruin. Cancel the Starscape. Boycott every business in that plaza. This is corporate greed at its absolute worst. Make her pay. Let us go protest outside her glass office today. My phone rang in my hand. It was the regional manager of the premium organic cafe chain that anchored my ground floor. Natalie, he shouted the second I answered. Our corporate headquarters is panicking. We are getting flooded with negative reviews online. People are threatening to boycott our coffee shops because we lease space from you. What is going on? I am handling it, I said, keeping my voice absolutely steady, despite the adrenaline spiking in my veins. It is a completely fabricated smear campaign. Issue a standard neutral PR statement and hold your ground. I hung up, threw on a suit, and sprinted to my car. As I drove, the radio played a morning talk show discussing the viral video. When I pulled into the parking garage of the Starscape, the reality hit me. A news van was parked near the entrance. I slipped past them and marched directly into my headquarters. The office was in absolute pure chaos. The phones were ringing incessantly. David was pacing behind his desk, looking completely pale. Natalie, he gasped, rushing toward me. It is a total disaster. 2 of our prospective retail tenants just pulled their applications. The wellness center is demanding an emergency meeting. And the global tech logistics firm, the 10-year partnership deal we are supposed to sign at 10 a.m. What about them? I demanded, dropping my briefcase onto my desk. Their lead acquisition director just emailed. David said, his voice shaking. They saw the video. They are putting the entire massive deal on an indefinite hold. They said they cannot risk the public relations nightmare of associating their brand with a developer accused of corporate theft and family displacement. I stared out the glass walls of my office overlooking the plaza. The morning sun was reflecting off the shipping containers, but the vibrant energy of my business felt suddenly fragile. My phone rang again. This time it was Harrison. I answered immediately, putting it on speaker. Do not say a single word to the press, Harrison barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Do not issue a statement. Do not engage with your sister-in-law online. They are killing my massive partnership deal, Harrison, I said, gripping the edge of my desk. Nia just handed the internet a loaded gun and pointed it directly at my company. That is not the worst part, Harrison replied, his tone dropping to a grim, mechanical register. I just received a notification from the Superior Court. Your father and brother filed an aggressive emergency injunction at 8 a.m. The judge signed it 10 minutes ago. Natalie, your corporate bank accounts are officially frozen. You cannot move a single dollar. Get down here, Harrison, I demanded immediately and hung up. I slammed the phone down and walked out of my office and straight into the main conference room. We called it the War Room. It was a large rectangular glass enclosure equipped with interactive digital whiteboards and a heavy oak table. My crisis public relations team was already assembled inside. 3 executives were frantically typing on their laptops while projecting real-time social media analytics onto the main wall display. The graphs were a massive wall of red downward trends, tracking the absolute devastation of my brand reputation. Natalie, the lead public relations director, said, her voice pitching upward with panic. The video is crossing 1 million views. We are seeing coordinated bot activity amplifying the negative comments. Local news stations are requesting statements, and 2 city council members just tweeted their concern about aggressive gentrification and displacement. We need to release a heartfelt apology video right now. We need to show empathy and promise a full internal investigation into the allegations. I stood at the head of the heavy oak table and looked at the panicked executives. I did not feel an ounce of panic. I felt a lethal, calculated calm. I am not apologizing for a completely fabricated fairy tale, I stated coldly. But the narrative, the director protested, wiping sweat from his forehead. It is painting you as a ruthless corporate villain destroying a minority family. The heavy glass door swung open. Harrison walked into the war room. He dropped his signature leather briefcase onto the table with a loud, commanding thud. He looked perfectly immaculate in his custom-tailored charcoal suit. He glanced at the red graphs on the digital display and let out a short, dismissive scoff. "Get out," Harrison ordered, looking directly at the public relations team. The lead director blinked in confusion. "We are in the middle of a Tier 1 crisis mitigation strategy. Your strategy is completely useless against a coordinated legal extortion campaign." Harrison replied, his voice dropping to a harsh mechanical register. "Leave the laptops. Clear the room, right now." The team scrambled, grabbing their coats and quickly exiting the glass enclosure. Harrison waited until the door clicked shut and activated the electronic privacy frosting on the glass walls. The transparent room instantly turned opaque, isolating us completely from the chaotic corporate headquarters outside. Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed financial documents. He did not look worried about the frozen bank accounts or the viral smear campaign. He looked like a shark that had just cornered a bleeding seal. "They filed the emergency injunction at 8 a.m., he said, sliding the first document across the table. "The judge granted a temporary freeze on your primary holding company accounts, based on the fabricated claim of elder abuse and corporate fraud. Your father is acting as the executor of the estate and claiming you stole this property. But that is just the shiny distraction, Natalie. That is the smokescreen." I picked up the court order, scanning the aggressive legal jargon. "So how are they funding this, Harrison? Richard is notoriously cheap, and his liquid assets are tied up in conservative trusts. Preston lost his entire crypto portfolio yesterday. A high-powered corporate litigator requires a massive retainer." Harrison smiled a thin, highly predatory smile. "That is the exact question I asked myself 30 minutes ago. So I made a few discreet calls to my less ethical contacts in the financial sector. I ran a deep dive asset check on your brother. I found out exactly how they are paying for this war." He slid a second, much thicker document across the oak table. It was a copy of a private lending contract. "Capital Apex," Harrison said, pointing a sharp finger at the corporate logo on the header. "A ruthless private equity firm known for predatory distressed asset loans." Yesterday afternoon, Preston took out a $6 million high-interest loan. $4 million went directly to cover his massive crypto margin call, preventing the immediate foreclosure of his luxury downtown penthouse. The remaining $2 million was handed directly to Donovan, a highly unethical corporate litigator, to fund this exact lawsuit against you. I stared at the contract. My mind worked at lightning speed, absorbing the financial data. What did he use for collateral? "The Penthouse," Harrison replied, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "The absolute idiot leveraged his $3.5 million unencumbered asset on a 32% interest loan, and the contract contains an aggressive accelerated default clause. If he misses a single payment, they seize the property immediately without standard foreclosure proceedings." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the polished oak. "They think they have me pinned," I murmured, analyzing the board. "They froze my account so I cannot fight a protracted legal battle. They unleashed a viral media campaign to destroy my tenant partnerships. They want to squeeze me until I hand over 50% of the Starscape just to make the pain stop." "That is their exact strategy," Harrison confirmed. "So how do we defend against it?" "We can file an emergency motion to lift the freeze, but it will take at least 48 hours. I stood up from the table, my mind locking onto a brilliant, devastating strategy. "We are not going to defend against it, Harrison. We are not going to fight their lawsuit. We are going to completely obliterate their entire existence. I do not just want to win. I want to take everything they have." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Your primary accounts are frozen, Natalie. You cannot execute a massive counteroffensive without capital." "My primary holding company accounts are frozen," I corrected him, my voice turning to steel. But my father and his shady lawyer do not know about my secondary venture capital firm, registered under a completely different corporate entity in Delaware. The firm I use to quietly acquire distressed real estate. That account has $8 million in liquid cash sitting perfectly untouched. Harrison slowly stood up, a realization dawning on his face. What are you going to do, Natalie? I looked down at the predatory loan contract from Capital Apex. I am going to make a phone call to the senior partners at Capital Apex, I said. They are a firm driven entirely by immediate profit. I am going to offer to buy the debt portfolio of my brother at a 20% premium. We are going to initiate a secret corporate acquisition of his specific loan right now. You want to buy his debt? Harrison asked, a wicked grin spreading across his face. I do not just want to buy it, I stated coldly. I am going to own him. I am going to become his absolute worst nightmare. Draft the acquisition paperwork, Harrison. We are going to buy that contract, and then we are going to spring the trap. Let them think they are winning for 48 more hours. Let them gloat. We are setting up a slaughter. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Outside the glass walls of my office, the internet was burning to the ground. Nia and her viral video had successfully mobilized a digital army. My inbox was flooded with hate mail. Local news stations were parked on the street corner, hoping to catch me fleeing the building in disgrace. I did not flee. I did not issue a single public statement. I simply put my phone on silent and focused entirely on tightening the noose. Instead of cowering, I instructed David to accelerate our timeline. We were going to host a massive VIP grand opening gala for the Phase 2 expansion of the Starscape, and we were going to host it on Friday night, the exact same deadline Preston had to satisfy his predatory loan. The guest list was meticulously curated. I did not just invite my own corporate tenants and prospective tech partners. I specifically targeted the social circle of my parents. I sent embossed digital invitations to Winston and Caroline Davenport and every other elite member of the Emerald Point Country Club. I knew they would come eager to see the controversial developer who was currently trending on social media. I wanted the absolute highest tier of Seattle wealth gathered on my rooftop. I wanted the maximum audience for the slaughter I was about to unleash. Across town, Richard and Preston were celebrating a premature victory inside the shady office of Donovan. They sat around his conference table drinking expensive bourbon while reviewing the court documents. A superior court judge had officially approved their emergency injunction that morning, completely freezing my primary holding accounts. To them, it looked like a flawless checkmate. They had successfully paralyzed my business operations and severed my financial lifeline. Preston leaned back in his leather chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His arrogance had fully returned, erasing the terrified shell of a man he had been just 2 days prior. The golden boy was back on top, convinced he had outsmarted the system. He looked at the legal summons resting on the table. We cannot just have a random courier drop this off at her office, Preston said, a vicious grin spreading across his face. She threw me out of her building like a common criminal. I want to look her in the eye when her empire crumbles. Richard nodded, setting his glass down with a heavy thud. She is hosting some lavish gala tonight on the rooftop of her plaza to distract from the bad press. Winston Davenport mentioned he received an invitation. We are going to walk right into that party with these court orders. We will serve her the papers publicly in front of every major investor and corporate tenant she has. We will humiliate her in front of the entire city. Donovan smiled and handed the sealed legal envelope to Richard. It will be the perfect execution, he agreed. Her reputation will be completely unsalvageable. While they were busy planning a theatrical public humiliation, Harrison was sitting across from my desk, handing me a sleek black folder. The secret corporate acquisition was officially complete. Using the $8 million of liquid cash from my secondary venture capital firm, we had successfully purchased the debt portfolio of my brother from Capital Apex. It cost a 20% premium, but it was worth every single penny. I opened the folder and reviewed the transfer documents. The signature of the Capital Apex managing partner was wet and legally binding. I was now the sole owner of the $6 million high-interest loan. More importantly, I was the legal holder of the collateral, the deed to the $3.5 million downtown penthouse. Harrison adjusted his tie, looking incredibly satisfied. "The trap is perfectly set, Natalie," he said, his voice laced with dark anticipation. "The accelerated default clause is active." Preston thinks the injunction buys him time to restructure, but he missed his mandatory check-in with Capital Apex at noon today because he assumes the legal strike against you makes him untouchable. The hard deadline for his first penalty payment is exactly 5 p.m. today. He will miss it because he does not even know we hold the paper. When 5 p.m. hits, he is in absolute default. The property goes into immediate foreclosure and ownership reverts directly to you. I looked at the sleek digital clock on my desk. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. In exactly 90 minutes, my older brother would officially become homeless, and he would not even realize it until he tried to ruin my life at my own party. I closed the black folder and locked it inside my desk drawer. Let them get dressed up. Let them practice their little speeches. They are walking right into a minefield, and they think they are holding the map. By 6 p.m., the sun began to set over the Seattle skyline, casting a golden glow across the glass structures of the starscape. The plaza was completely transformed. String lights illuminated the courtyard. Catering staff moved seamlessly through the crowds carrying crystal flutes of champagne. The rooftop event space was filling up with the most powerful people in the city. I stood in my office looking out over the empire I had built from nothing. I turned from the window and walked to the mirror. I wore a sharp-tailored emerald green suit that commanded absolute authority. I fastened a simple gold watch around my wrist. I did not look like a victim of a viral smear campaign. I looked like an apex predator preparing for a feast. The trap was locked and loaded. The perfect bait was set. My toxic family was currently riding up the elevator, completely blinded by greed. They thought they were coming to an execution. They did not realize they were heading to the guillotine. I grabbed my tablet and walked out to politely greet my guests. The rooftop of the starscape was a breathtaking testament to architectural triumph. We were surrounded by panoramic views of the Seattle skyline. Waiters drifted through the crowd, balancing trays loaded with champagne. Flashbulbs illuminated the space, capturing the elite of the city as they admired the multi-million-dollar transformation. I stood near the glass podium, taking in the gathering. Despite the vicious social media campaign initiated by Nia, the turnout was spectacular. The ultra-wealthy did not care about internet gossip when real money was on the table. I saw Winston and Caroline Davenport chatting enthusiastically with the chief executive. Everywhere I looked, I saw power standing directly on my property. The electronic music faded into the background. The low hum of networking quieted down. Faces turned toward the stage. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit and stepped up to the podium. A wave of polite applause washed over the rooftop. I looked out at the sea of tailored suits. I fought hard for this second. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice projecting clearly through the sound system. 6 months ago, the ground beneath your feet was a forgotten wasteland of broken glass and rusted fences. People looked at this space and saw nothing but liability. True development is not just about pouring concrete, it is about having vision to see an empire where others see dirt. I paused, letting the words hang in the crisp night air. I was about to continue my remarks when a sharp electronic chime echoed across the rooftop. The heavy glass doors of the VIP elevator slid open. Every head turned toward the sound. Stepping out of the elevator was the entire toxic ensemble of my family. Richard led the charge. His chest puffed out, an expression of predatory triumph plastered across his face. Beatrice flanked him, wearing an ostentatious evening gown. Right behind them was Preston, practically vibrating with arrogant energy. Nia walked close to her husband, holding her phone high in the air, recording the invasion for her digital audience. Finally, Donovan the litigator trailed the group, clutching a sealed legal envelope. The atmosphere on the rooftop shifted instantly. The relaxed energy of the gala evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. The elite guests whispered behind their champagne flutes, recognizing the family from the viral video. I saw Caroline Davenport lean into her husband, her eyes wide with scandalous delight. This was exactly the kind of high society blood sport they secretly craved. I did not flinch. I did not step back from the podium. I stood perfectly still, watching the procession march across my rooftop. My security team materialized, moving to intercept the uninvited guests. The lead guard reached for his radio. I caught the eye of the guard and gave a tiny shake of my head. I raised my hand flat, silently commanding the security team to stand down. I wanted this. I needed this to happen exactly the way they planned it. Richard marched straight through, the crowd forcing tech billionaires to step aside. Preston was right beside him, walking with the swagger of a man who firmly believed he was holding a royal flush. He stared up at me on the stage with a look of pure hatred, mixed with giddy anticipation. Nia kept her camera lens pointed directly at my face, narrating the approach. Preston did not wait for his father. He vaulted aggressively onto the side of the stage. He marched straight up to the glass podium. His breath smelled of bourbon and desperate adrenaline. He simply reached out and violently snatched the microphone right out of my hand. The harsh feedback of the microphone echoed painfully across the rooftop. Preston turned his back to me and faced the stunned crowd. "I am sorry to interrupt this lovely party," Preston boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing off the glass structures. "But nobody here should be drinking champagne with this woman. My name is Preston. I am the older brother of this supposed visionary developer, and I am here to officially announce that this entire plaza is an active crime scene." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Winston Davenport lowered his glass, staring at the stage in shock. Nia continued filming, capturing every dramatic reaction from the wealthy guests. Preston paced across the stage, feeding off the silenced crowd. "This property does not belong to Natalie," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger back at me. "She is a fraud. She manipulated our elderly, medicated grandfather into signing away the most valuable asset in our family portfolio. She stole $12 million from her own blood. And right now, while she wears fancy suits, she is actively trying to make my wife a black woman and our children completely homeless by withholding our rightful family inheritance." The whispers in the crowd escalated into a chaotic hum of scandalized conversation. Preston looked down at Donovan, who handed up the thick legal envelope. Preston ripped the envelope open and pulled out the emergency injunction paperwork, holding it high above his head. "We are not just here to expose her," Preston announced, his voice reaching a fever pitch of arrogance. "We took this to a superior court judge this morning. This is an official legal injunction. The corporate bank accounts of Natalie are completely frozen as of 8 a.m. today. This property is officially under a legal dispute lien. She cannot sign a single lease. She cannot authorize a single contract. Her company is completely paralyzed. This empire is a stolen house of cards, and we just knocked it down." Preston turned back to face me, dropping the legal documents directly onto my glass podium. He leaned in close, a nasty, vindictive smile stretching across his face. He thought he had completely destroyed me in front of the entire city. He thought I was trapped. I looked at the papers, then into his arrogant eyes, unfazed by his theatrical performance. The stage was set. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear or beg for mercy. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting on my glass podium, and then looked directly into the arrogant eyes of my older brother. Preston was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with the adrenaline of his theatrical performance. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the independent sister he always despised to finally crumble under the weight of his superior maneuvering. I reached into the inner pocket of my emerald green suit and retrieved my sleek digital tablet. I placed it gently on the podium right next to his ridiculous court injunction. "Is that the best you have, Preston?" I asked, my voice echoing through the hidden lapel microphone I was wearing. The sound was crystal clear, cutting through the heavy silence of the rooftop. You burst into my professional gala, you scream about fraud, and you wave around a piece of paper you bought with predatory money. You think you can walk onto my property and control the narrative. Preston sneered, leaning closer. It is over, Natalie, he hissed off microphone. You are finished. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that made him take a half step back. You should have learned by now, Preston. I never leave anything to chance. I tapped the screen of my tablet. The lights on the rooftop instantly dimmed. The ambient electronic music cut out completely. Behind me, the massive high-definition LED display screen that had been projecting the logo of the Starscape flickered and went entirely black. What are you doing? Richard demanded, his voice suddenly wavering with a hint of uncertainty. He took a step toward the stage, his eyes darting between me and the massive dark screen. I am doing exactly what you asked for, Richard, I announced to the crowd. You wanted to talk about my grandfather. You wanted to talk about the distribution of family assets and who manipulated a vulnerable old man. So let us show all of your esteemed friends exactly how the family portfolio was handled. I tapped the screen one more time. The massive LED display flared to life, illuminating the entire rooftop with a harsh fluorescent glare. It was not a promotional video. It was security camera footage. The quality was slightly grainy, but the audio was perfectly clear. In the top right corner, the date stamp flashed. It was exactly 4 years ago. The location was a private VIP suite at the Seattle Medical Center. The crowd of tech billionaires and real estate tycoons fell dead silent. On the massive screen, my grandfather lay in a hospital bed, looking incredibly frail and heavily medicated. The steady beeping of a heart monitor echoed across my rooftop party. Standing on either side of the hospital bed were Richard and Preston. They were not comforting the dying patriarch of our family. They were aggressively shoving a thick stack of legal documents into his trembling hands. Sign the paper, Dad, Richard barked on the video, his voice cruel and impatient. You need to sign the property transfers today before the medication makes you completely incoherent. My grandfather weakly pushed the pen away, his voice a fragile whisper. What about Natalie? He asked on the recording. I want to leave her the downtown property. She has a good head for business. Preston let out a loud, obnoxious laugh on the video. It was the exact same arrogant laugh he had used in the parking garage when he offered me $10,000. Do not be ridiculous, Grandpa Preston sneered on the giant screen. Natalie threw away her banking career to play construction worker. She does not know how to handle a prime downtown asset. I need the penthouse for my investment firm. Just sign the damn paper, Richard growled, grabbing the frail hand of my grandfather and forcefully wrapping his fingers around the heavy pen. We are giving her the old industrial parking lot on 4th Avenue, the trash dump. It is exactly what she deserves for embarrassing this family. Let her play in the dirt. The video clearly showed Richard physically guiding the hand of the medicated old man, forcing him to sign his name on the dotted line. Preston stood in the background, grinning triumphantly and checking his luxury watch. Perfect, Preston said on the recording. Let her sleep under the stars. The penthouse is mine. The video feed froze on the smug, grinning face of my brother. The silence on the rooftop was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on the entire crowd. The elite of Seattle stood frozen, staring at the massive screen in pure, unadulterated shock. They had just witnessed undeniable, documented elder abuse. They had just watched a respected patriarch violently coerce a dying man into changing his will. Then, the whispers began. The whispers turned into a low, disgusted murmur that rapidly spread through the crowd of wealthy investors. I watched Winston Davenport step away from Richard as if my father had suddenly caught a highly contagious disease. Caroline Davenport looked at Beatrice with an expression of pure physical revulsion. The high society friends my parents valued above their own flesh and blood were looking at them with absolute contempt. Nia stood frozen near the stage. Her phone was still held high in the air, broadcasting the entire event live to her hundreds of thousands of followers. The comment section on her live stream, which just minutes ago had been demanding my corporate execution, was instantly flipping. The internet mob was watching the exact same hidden camera footage. They were watching her husband and her father-in-law commit blatant elderly coercion. The entire victim narrative she had carefully crafted all morning was completely eradicated in less than 2 minutes. Nia slowly lowered her phone, her hands shaking violently. She looked at Preston, her eyes wide with a sudden terrifying realization that she had just broadcast the destruction of their own social standing to the entire world. Preston stood on the stage, completely paralyzed. The color had entirely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored suit. He stared at his own giant frozen face on the LED screen, his mouth hanging open in silent terror. Richard was hyperventilating near the front row. "Where did you get that?" he choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "That is illegal. You cannot have that footage." I picked up my microphone and stepped out from behind the glass podium, closing the distance between myself and my brother. When you own a massive commercial development firm, Richard, you hire exceptionally thorough lawyers. I said, my voice echoing cleanly over the disgusted murmurs of the crowd. My legal team legally subpoenaed the private hospital security archives to ensure the provenance of my commercial deed was perfectly clean. We found that footage 3 months ago. I was going to keep it sealed out of respect for the memory of my grandfather. But since you decided to walk onto my property and accuse me of elder abuse, I figured it was time for a public viewing. I turned to face Preston, who was physically shaking. The emergency injunction you hold in your hand is based on perjury. Preston, I stated clearly. You lied to a superior court judge. You committed fraud to freeze my accounts. Preston backed away from me, his expensive leather shoes scraping against the stage. It proves nothing. He stammered, his voice, a pathetic high-pitched squeak. The judge still signed the order. Your accounts are still frozen, Natalie. You are still broke. I smiled widely. I was waiting for him to bring up the money. Because the video was just the opening act. The real execution was about to begin. Preston clutched the court injunction to his chest like a physical shield. He looked around wildly at the disgusted faces of the wealthy investors and socialites below the stage. The video proves absolutely nothing, he stammered, his voice cracking under the intense scrutiny. It is completely inadmissible in a civil court. The judge already signed this injunction, Natalie. You have absolutely zero leverage here. You are just trying to distract everyone from the fact that your little empire is legally dead. The arrogance that had fueled his grand entrance was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind a terrified man frantically trying to hold on to his false reality. I stepped back from the microphone and looked toward the edge of the stage. A tall figure in a flawless charcoal suit stepped out of the shadows. Harrison walked onto the stage with the predatory grace of a corporate assassin. He carried a thick black leather binder under his right arm. The murmurs in the crowd died down instantly. Harrison stopped next to me and took the microphone from my hand. Let us talk about the law. Preston Harrison said, his voice resonating with absolute calm authority. Let us talk about how you funded this little theatrical performance tonight. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Harrison continued, turning his gaze to the audience, my client did not just uncover a disturbing history of elder abuse. We also looked into the current financial stability of the man standing on this stage. 2 days ago, Preston experienced a margin call. His crypto hedge fund completely collapsed. He lost everything. The crowd gasped again. Richard yelled from the floor, telling Harrison to shut his mouth, but my security team stepped forward to keep him contained. To cover this massive failure and to fund this frivolous lawsuit against my client, Harrison continued, Preston sought outside capital, but traditional banks do not lend to men with liquidated portfolios. So Preston went to a private equity firm, a firm known as Capital Apex. The name sent a visible ripple of shock through the audience. Everyone in commercial finance knew Capital Apex. They preyed on desperate fools. Preston took a step backward, his eyes darting toward the black binder. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Harrison ignored him and opened the heavy binder on the glass podium. He flipped to a specific tab and pulled out a crisp white document. "I hold a certified copy of the commercial lending contract you signed yesterday afternoon," Harrison announced. "You took out a $6 million high-interest loan from Capital Apex, $4 million to cover your immediate crypto debts and $2 million to pay your shady litigator. And you agreed to an annual interest rate of 32% compounding monthly." Laughter erupted from the back of the rooftop. It was the mocking, dismissive laughter of actual billionaires realizing they were looking at an amateur. 32% was financial suicide. But the interest rate is not the most fascinating part of this legal document. Harrison continued, his eyes locking onto Preston. "To secure this massive loan, you had to provide hard collateral, and the only unencumbered asset you had left in the world was the downtown penthouse. The very same penthouse you aggressively coerced your dying grandfather into giving you. You put your own home up as the sole collateral for a predatory loan." Naya let out a sharp, terrified shriek from the side of the stage. She stared at her husband with absolute horror. "You put the penthouse up!" she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You told me you fixed the margin call. You told me the house was completely safe." Preston raised his hands defensively. "It is safe, Nia," he pleaded, his eyes darting frantically. "The injunction gave us the leverage. We force Natalie to settle, we take her equity, and we pay off the loan." "It was a calculated risk." "It was not a risk," Preston Harrison corrected him, his voice slicing through the air like a razor. "It was a legally binding death sentence. Let me read a very specific clause from page 42 of the contract you foolishly signed without having competent legal counsel review it." Harrison adjusted his glasses and read directly from the highlighted text. Clause 7.4. The accelerated default provision. The borrower agrees to a mandatory daily check-in with the lending firm to verify asset liquidity. Failure to complete this check-in, or failure to remit the initial penalty payment by exactly 5 p.m. on the designated date, constitutes an immediate and uncurable default. Harrison looked up from the binder and stared directly into the soul of my brother. "It means there is no grace period, Preston. It means there are no warning letters. It means there is no standard lengthy foreclosure process. If you miss your deadline by a single minute, the firm automatically and irreversibly seizes the collateral." Preston swallowed hard, a sick look washing over his pale face. "I did not miss a payment," he stammered. "I have the injunction. I have the legal leverage. You have a piece of paper that freezes my client for 48 hours, Harrison mocked. "But you were so busy celebrating your dirty injunction that you forgot your obligations to your own creditors. You missed your mandatory noon check-in with Capital Apex today. That triggered the immediate penalty clause, a penalty payment due at exactly 5 p.m. this afternoon." Harrison tapped his expensive watch. "It is now 7:30 p.m. You are 2.5 hours past your uncurable default deadline." Preston stumbled back, hitting the edge of the glass podium. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the chest. The reality of the contract he signed was finally crashing down on his arrogant shoulders. He had traded his entire future for a temporary moment of leverage against me. And he had completely failed to read the absolute final fine print. Preston shook his head violently, his perfectly styled hair falling completely out of place. He pulled his smartphone from his suit jacket, his fingers trembling so badly he nearly dropped the expensive device onto the glass stage. "That is not how this works," he shouted, trying to project a false sense of authority to the watching crowd. "Private equity firms negotiate. They restructure. I will just call the managing partner at Capital Apex right now. My father knows people on their executive board. We will pay the initial penalty fee tomorrow morning and reinstate the loan." You are just trying to scare me with legal technicalities, Harrison, but I know how the real financial world operates. Richard shouted his aggressive agreement from the floor of the rooftop, pushing violently against the security guards. Call them right now, Preston. Richard ordered, his face red with desperate fury. Get the managing director on the phone, and we will wire the penalty payment from my offshore trust tonight. We are not losing the penthouse to a missed phone call. Naya was weeping openly now, the reality of her impending homelessness, stripping away every ounce of her curated social media persona. Please, Preston, she sobbed, gripping the edge of the stage. Just fix this. Call them and fix this right now. Preston frantically dialed the emergency contact number for his loan officer at Capital Apex. He put the phone to his ear, his eyes darting around the silent crowd of elite investors who were watching him unravel in real time. The call went straight to a disconnected tone. He pulled the phone away, staring at the screen in pure confusion. He dialed the main corporate office number. The automated message informed him that the specific debt portfolio division had been completely dissolved and restructured. I stepped forward, my emerald green heels clicking sharply against the stage floor. I reached out and gently took the microphone back from Harrison. I looked down at my older brother, watching the absolute terror completely consume his arrogant features. You cannot call them, Preston, I said, my voice echoing across the rooftop with a chilling, serene clarity. There is no one left at Capital Apex to take your phone call. There is no managing partner waiting to negotiate a restructuring fee. There is no grace period for you to exploit using the influential connections of our father. Preston lowered his phone, his chest heaving. What did you do? He whispered. I smiled. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated corporate execution. Private equity firms like Capital Apex do not care about building long-term relationships, I explained, walking slowly across the stage. They care about immediate liquid capital. They care about fast profits. When you took out that $6 million loan, you signed a contract that allowed them to sell your debt to any interested third party without your prior consent. It is standard language in predatory lending. I stopped directly in front of him. 48 hours ago, while you were busy plotting to freeze my bank accounts with your shady lawyer, I initiated a secret corporate acquisition. I used the massive liquidity from my secondary venture capital firm in Delaware to make Capital Apex an offer they simply could not refuse. I purchased your specific debt portfolio at a 20% premium. The collective breath of the entire rooftop caught in a single unified gasp. Winston Davenport actually took a step back, his eyes wide with profound respect and sheer terror. The elite crowd suddenly realized they were not just watching family drama. They were witnessing a legendary corporate slaughter. You bought the loan? Preston choked out, his knees buckling slightly. You bought my debt. I bought everything, Preston. I stated, my voice resonating with absolute titanium strength. Capital Apex no longer holds the note on your downtown penthouse. My holding company holds the note. My secondary firm is the sole beneficiary of that 32% interest rate. My firm dictates the terms of the accelerated default clause. I am your bank, Preston. I am your debt collector. Preston grabbed the edges of the glass podium, trying to keep himself standing upright. But I am your brother, he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. You cannot do this. You have to give me an extension. We are family, Natalie. Family, I echoed, letting the word hang heavily in the crisp night air. That is a fascinating word for you to use right now. Did you think about family when you coerced our dying grandfather into signing away his assets? Did you think about family when you mocked me in the parking garage and told me to sleep in the dirt? Did you think about family when you walked onto this stage 5 minutes ago trying to destroy my entire business empire? I shook my head slowly. We are not family, Preston. We are just two people engaged in a corporate transaction. And you are a terrible businessman who failed to read the absolute final fine print of your own contract. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of legal paper. It bore the official seal of the Superior Court and the wet signature of a presiding judge. "You missed your mandatory check-in at noon today," I said, holding the document up for the entire crowd to see. "You triggered the uncurable default clause. The hard deadline for your penalty payment was exactly 5 p.m. You missed it because you thought your little injunction made you completely invincible." I took a step closer to him, forcing him to look directly at the legal document in my hand. "At exactly 5 o'clock and 1 minute this afternoon, my legal team filed the accelerated default paperwork. The judge reviewed your contract and signed the order instantly. Because you waived your right to a standard foreclosure process, in exchange for the fast cash, the property transfer was completely automatic." Nia let out a blood-curdling scream, covering her face with her hands. Richard stood paralyzed on the floor, his mouth hanging open in silent, absolute shock. Beatrice had already collapsed into a nearby chair, weeping hysterically as her entire social standing evaporated into thin air. I looked Preston dead in the eye, delivering the final devastating blow. "I foreclosed on your penthouse exactly 3 hours ago, Preston," I said, my voice slicing through the silence like a freshly sharpened blade. "You came here tonight to take my parking lot, but I just took your home." The legal paper slipped from the trembling fingers of Preston and fluttered to the glass stage. His knees buckled. He collapsed forward, catching himself on the transparent podium. A guttural sound escaped his throat as the finality of his ruin settled over him. He was entirely stripped of his identity. The golden boy had been completely erased. The silence on the rooftop shattered into a chaotic symphony of shocked gasps and the unmistakable sound of the Seattle elite actively distancing themselves from a sinking ship. The high society friends my parents cultivated were looking at them as if they were radioactive. Nia lunged forward, dropping her smartphone against the glass stage. She grabbed Preston by the lapels of his expensive tailored suit jacket, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You lied to me!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the night air. "You swore the margin call was handled. You swore my house was completely safe." Preston could not even look at her. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, tears of sheer panic leaking down his face. "Nia, I am sorry," he choked out, barely able to breathe. "I will fix it. I will get it back. Get it back," Nia shrieked, shaking him violently. "With what money? You have zero liquidity. You have zero assets. You just handed a $3.5 million penthouse to your sister because you were too stupid to read a contract." "I did not marry a homeless man, Preston. I did not spend 5 years building my brand to be dragged into poverty because you play with fake internet money." Nia released his jacket, shoving him back against the podium. Her fingers closed around the massive diamond engagement ring Preston bought her. She yanked the heavy diamond off her finger with a violent jerk. "I am not going down with you." Nia spat, her voice echoing off the surrounding skyscrapers. "I am not spending one single night sleeping in a cheap motel while you try to beg your daddy for another bailout. I am filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. Do not even try to call me." She threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his chest. It bounced off, clattering loudly against the glass floor. Nia did not look back. She turned on her heel and marched straight through the crowd of stunned billionaires. The sea of tailored suits parted to let her through. She stepped into the glass elevator, slammed her hand against the button, and disappeared from the rooftop forever. Preston slowly slid down the side of the podium until he was sitting on the floor, staring blankly at the discarded diamond ring near his expensive leather shoes. Richard stepped forward, his face a sickly shade of gray. The commanding patriarch who threatened to destroy my life 2 hours ago was gone. He looked frantically at the wealthy investors surrounding him. "Winston," he called out, raising a shaking hand. "Winston, please. This is a massive misunderstanding. A simple family dispute. We can explain everything." Winston Davenport did not say a word. He simply placed a protective hand on the back of his wife and slowly walked toward the exit. The elite crowd followed his lead, They collectively turned their backs, forming a physical wall of rejection. Richard was officially excommunicated from the only society he ever cared about. Richard turned to me, his eyes wide with terrifying realization. "Natalie," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. "Natalie, please." "You made your point. You proved you are the smartest person in the room. You won. Now please void the default. We can negotiate a settlement. Just give the penthouse back." I looked down at the man who had stolen my college fund. "You have nothing left to guarantee a $6 million loan." "Richard," I stated, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any sympathy, "your liquid assets are locked. Your reputation is dead. You have absolutely nothing I want." Suddenly, Beatrice pushed past the security guards. She stumbled forward, her designer gown tangling around her legs. She did not walk up the stage stairs. She collapsed directly onto the floor at the base of the stage. My mother fell to her hands and knees in front of hundreds of people. Real tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Natalie, please," she sobbed, her voice ragged and broken. "I am begging you, do not do this to us. He is your brother. We are still your parents. You cannot leave him on the street. You cannot take his home. We are family." She reached up, trying to grab the hem of my emerald green trousers. I took a deliberate step back, placing myself entirely out of her reach. I looked down at her, kneeling on the hard floor, weeping for the son who had just tried to ruin me. "Family," I repeated, looking from the sobbing woman on the floor to the broken man sitting next to the podium. "You love to use that word when you are bleeding. Where was this desperate devotion to family when I was starving in a freezing apartment? Where was this unconditional love when you forced a dying man to rewrite his legacy so you could mock me in a parking garage?" Beatrice covered her face with her hands, weeping uncontrollably. "We were wrong," she wailed. "We were so wrong. Please, Natalie, show some mercy. He is your own flesh and blood." I looked at my mother groveling at my feet. I looked at my father stripped of his power. I looked at my golden brother sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance. The trap had snapped shut flawlessly. Every single thing they valued had been taken from them in a matter of minutes. "Mercy?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You are asking the wrong person, Beatrice. I am not your daughter anymore. I am just a debt collector doing her job." The silence that followed my words was absolute. Beatrice stared up at me, her tear-streaked face frozen in a mask of pure disbelief. She searched my eyes for any lingering trace of the desperate daughter who used to crave her validation. She found absolutely nothing but cold, polished concrete. The realization that she had completely lost her power over me broke whatever fragile composure she had left. She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands, sobbing with a ragged, pathetic sound that echoed across the pristine glass floor of my rooftop. Richard tried to pull her up, grabbing her arm with trembling hands. "Get up, Beatrice," he hissed, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming authority. "Stop begging her, she is a monster." He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and wild with panic. "You think you have won, Natalie?" he spat, trying to muster one final threat. "You think this makes you a titan, but you are just a vindictive little girl who got lucky. The industry will see exactly what you are, and no one will ever do business with a developer who destroys her own family." I did not even have to answer him. Winston Davenport, the man Richard had spent decades trying to impress, stepped out from the crowd of silent onlookers. Winston adjusted his custom silk tie and looked down at my father with an expression of profound disgust. "Actually," Richard Winston said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet rooftop, "the only person in this industry who is completely finished is you. I am withdrawing my capital from your trust management firm first thing Monday morning, and I know at least 5 other men standing on this roof who will be doing the exact same thing because you are a liability." Richard recoiled as if he had been physically struck. The last pillar of his false empire, his precious social standing, was completely pulverized. He looked around the crowd, seeking a single friendly face, but found only cold, hard rejection. He was entirely excommunicated. Preston finally moved. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor using the glass podium for support. He looked like a hollowed-out shell. His expensive tailored suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. The golden boy who had mocked me in the parking garage, who had laughed while my grandfather was coerced, was completely gone. "Natalie," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "Where am I supposed to go? I have no money. I have no wife. I have absolutely nothing left." I looked at my older brother. I looked at my weeping mother and my ruined father. I remembered the cold mahogany boardroom. I remembered the cruel laughter that bounced off the walls when the lawyer handed me a deed to a trash-filled parking lot. I took a slow, deliberate step toward them. "Do you remember what you told me in the boardroom, Preston?" I asked, my voice echoing with absolute clarity. "Do you remember the joke you all found so incredibly amusing when you handed me a patch of dirt and took the luxury penthouse?" Preston closed his eyes, a fresh tear sliding down his pale cheek. "You told me I could use my concrete slab to sleep under the stars," I reminded them, my words slicing through the crisp night air. "Well, I built an empire on my concrete slab. And since I just foreclosed on your penthouse and seized all your assets, I suggest you go find a good patch of grass to do the same." I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The sharp sound cracked like a whip across the rooftop. My security team moved with absolute precision. 6 large guards in black suits stepped forward and physically surrounded my family. The lead guard grabbed Richard by the arm, forcefully pulling him toward the elevator. 2 others hauled Preston to his feet, dragging his limp body across the glass floor. Beatrice screamed, kicking and thrashing as security lifted her by her arms, carrying her away from my stage. The Seattle elite watched in absolute silence as the toxic family that had tried to crash my gala was physically dragged into the elevator and removed from my property forever. The heavy glass doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of my mother wailing. The elevator descended, plunging them down into the reality of their new ruined lives. I stood on the stage, taking a deep, slow breath. The toxic weight I had carried for my entire life was completely gone. I turned to face my guests. Harrison stepped up beside me, smiling his signature predatory smile. He tapped his champagne flute against the glass podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison announced loudly, "the trash has been officially removed from the premises. Please enjoy the rest of the evening." The tension on the rooftop instantly shattered. A massive wave of genuine applause erupted from the crowd. The music swelled back to life, filling the air with vibrant energy. Waiters immediately resumed circulating with trays of premium champagne. The party did not just resume, it completely exploded with a new electric atmosphere. I stepped down from the stage and was immediately approached by David, the chief executive of the global tech logistics firm. He held 2 crystal flutes of champagne and offered one to me with a look of profound respect. "Natalie," he said, smiling warmly, "I apologize for pausing our negotiations this morning. After witnessing how you handle hostile corporate takeovers, I can confidently say we do not just want a 10-year lease. We want to double our square footage and make the Starscape our primary regional headquarters. I will have my legal team send the revised contracts to Harrison tonight." I clinked my glass against his. "I look forward to the partnership, David," I replied. I spent the next hour shaking hands, securing multi-million-dollar deals, and accepting the congratulations of the most powerful people in the city. But as the gala reached its peak, I needed a moment of absolute quiet. I excused myself from a conversation with a venture capitalist and walked to the far edge of the rooftop terrace. I leaned against the thick glass barrier and looked out over the glowing Seattle skyline. The city stretched out before me, a vast ocean of light and ambition. The cold night air washed over my face, feeling incredibly clean and fresh. For years, I thought the cruelty of my family would eventually destroy me. I thought their constant rejection was a definitive measure of my worth. Toxic family members rely entirely on your silence. They depend on your desire to keep the peace. They use your loyalty as a weapon to keep you compliant and small, while they extract everything of value from your life. They convince you that you need them to survive. But standing here looking at the empire I built from a discarded parking lot, I realized the absolute truth. True power does not come from fighting them for validation. True power comes from walking away, building your own fortress, and letting their own blinding arrogance hand you the shovel they use to dig their own graves. They thought they left me with absolutely nothing. In reality, they gave me the exact foundation I needed to conquer their entire world. Have you ever turned an insult into an empire? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more stories of sweet, undeniable justice. The story of Natalie teaches a profound lesson about the nature of self-worth and the illusion of toxic control. We often allow the people closest to us to define our potential based on their own limitations and selfish desires. When a toxic family system designates someone as the failure, it is rarely about that person lacking ability. It is almost always a psychological mechanism used by the family to protect their own fragile egos and maintain a false sense of superiority. The essential lesson here is that you do not have to accept the narrative that others attempt to write for you. Natalie was handed a literal wasteland and told it was all she deserved. Instead of internalizing their mockery, she used their absolute disdain as fuel. She recognized that the ultimate response to toxic people is not engaging in endless emotional arguments, but achieving massive, undeniable success completely outside of their control. The story demonstrates that true power comes from strategic emotional detachment. By walking away and focusing entirely on her own professional growth, she built a corporate foundation so strong that their eventual attacks shattered completely against it. When people try to hand you dirt, they fully expect you to wallow in it. You always possess the independent choice to use that exact dirt to pour a solid concrete foundation for your own empire. The validation you desperately seek from toxic individuals is entirely worthless compared to the validation you earn by proving your own undeniable strength to yourself. You must learn to leverage their underestimation as your greatest strategic advantage in business and in life. Please share this reflection with someone who needs a reminder of their own power today.